I think, quite generally, there is no single response to catastrophic incidents. One of the problems is we catastrophize all the time about what is the violence we experience in schools and other settings. So what if somebody's got a knife in one hand? I call it the what if game. What if they've got a hammer in the other? What if they've got a shotgun? Where do you draw the line to say that actually that's not even a training question, that's just frightening everyone within a system? I think there's a recent example about knife crime in the UK and knives in schools. When the government did their national survey, it's a small number of schools where that's a problem. And that's something you need a systemic response to look at. Getting someone on a training course, as somebody said to me recently again, to take a piece of cucumber off someone or a fake weapon is absolutely bizarre and crazy when you think about it. Yet people find an attraction to that because it gives them a sense of confidence about what could happen in a crisis situation. So what we need to do is focus our training on the more general, the more common. For example, verbal aggression and hostility and threatening behaviour is the most common thing that people encounter. How good are people at diffusing that? So if you're going to teach people about, say, physical restraint, as an example, what you can't do is teach lots of different restraint methods and lots of different crisis responses. You have to keep things simple but realistic. I mean, I was asked very recently about weapons, and I'm going to come clean with something. I used to teach a martial art jiu-jitsu for many years, and I've never admitted it, because actually I do genuinely believe that most people with those skills should be kept as far away from the vulnerable as possible, because they're answering different catastrophic questions. How would you get out of this situation? What if there's two people? What if you're in a dark alley? You're in a school or in a place where you have a working relationship with that child or young person. They're not normally complete strangers. And so what we need to be looking at is a very different answer to those questions. So for me, even the same goes with restraint and the relationship that we have with individuals. What people do all the time, in my opinion, is they scaremonger with extreme examples that just swamp our media all the time. And that then steers training questions. Just consider this as an example for yourself. Imagine we only focused on a 9/11 incident in terms of our safety. We would dismiss all the other things that we need to do to keep us safe to focus on an extreme situation that we probably couldn't plan for. What we can do is focus on the more general, more realistic things to happen. I've worked with individuals who are frightened and scared to work in situations, and training has its place to increase confidence. Frightened, scared people often get very stressed, and stressed people make bad decisions. So for me, the whole training question is about a very different response that we're training individuals with. Somebody said to me recently, you've got to be quite calm and quite laid-back practitioner to do the low arousal approach. To a degree, but you haven't got to be driven by the latest knee-jerk kind of fear situation or scenario that's generated by people. So, for example, I'll be honest with you, we'll never teach people how to take knives off people, whether you gave me 5 weeks or 5 days or 5 minutes, because it's a crazy thing to do. What I would do is teach someone how to get themselves and keep themselves safe in a situation and keep the person they're supporting safe. But that would be looking at the most common incidents and focusing around the individuals. One last thing we do at Studio 3, and I know you've asked me this question before, if there are very extreme behaviours, which we do work with, then that requires a bespoke, tailor-made response, not some training response that you just take off the shelf and hand to a school. And there are a small number of individuals. Often they're quite highly traumatised individuals. They come from very complex backgrounds. They require a bespoke response. And that's why we'll never shy away from that. I suppose the question you never asked me was, have I ever been threatened by somebody with a knife? And the answer is yes. And it was very scary. And it was in a care context. And it's not something I want to repeat again. After all my years of training, how did I respond? I got out of the situation as quickly as possible and got other people out of the situation. And then we ended up calling the police. Because actually there's a point where we need to decide whether we're policemen or women, with all due respect to them, or whether we're teachers or we're professionals working in environment. And often if you do too much training for extremes, the boundaries get blurred. I would rather a school tell me that in an extreme situation they called the police to a situation rather than they tried to handle something themselves that they just were not equipped to deal with.